Hello, beautiful humans. Welcome to the PowerChair Podcast. This is podcast number 2. I'm your host, Brad Sevigny, and let's get into it. So last podcast, there was some issues with audio. I do apologize for that. I'm figuring out all the kinks here. I am starting out from scratch, and, the PowerChair Podcast has the lovely, large staff, so many of us on the team, and they include me, myself, and I. So, we're starting from ground up here. So I'm just talking to you beautiful humans on some headphones at the moment, and we'll figure out a recording solution shortly. Want to get this out here. Today's podcast, what I want to talk to you guys about is something that I noticed in myself, and I hope that I can bring some value to people watching this, talking about how hard it is to get started, to getting started on something. Doing this challenge, and quite frankly, the challenge of becoming a professional magician and phrasing it that way, in my mind was more of like a justification to help that process of getting started. Because the truth is, I've been a performing magician for a very long time. My gosh, well over a decade. But I was so, and when I use the word performing magician, I got to be careful saying that. I mean, it was on and off, and it was like for friends, and then I went through a stint of like maybe a year and a bit where I was actually getting paid for it and doing corporate events and restaurants and these types of things. And oh my gosh, doing an 8-year-old birthday party is a ruthless gig. I don't care who you are, man. Wow, that was, kids are a ruthless audience, man. They will tell you exactly what they think. Give me a drunk heckler, please, instead. But so I had a stint of that, and I've always kind of had a deck of cards lying around and that sort of thing. But to actually fully commit to it, to fully go after it, to fully give magic everything I had, and to get booked as a magician and turn it into a business, into a living, man. What's so bizarre about it is the technicals, and like I'm talking, when I say technicals, I mean like the marketing, the reaching out, the rehearsals, the practicing, all these things. That's actually not that hard. It really isn't. I really do believe any human being, even if you have no experience as a magician at all, if you're interested in becoming one, it's doable. It's actually not that difficult. It's just building like a base knowledge of different effects so you can kind of work on the fly in different environments, and that's just a prospect of time. Like, you just got to put the effort in and read. But I'm sure somebody out there has a course or some kind of maybe that's something I could offer people. I'll think about that. But the technicals aren't difficult is the point. The real challenge, and this is something that I don't think is a unique experience. It's definitely the experience I have had, and I don't think it's unique. The real challenge is to, as corny as it sounds, like really believe in yourself, like to fight for yourself, to like really step into your passion. Why is that so hard? It's kind of like, I don't know, like I'm trying to find a way to equate this. Like almost like in my mind, I'm thinking like, I've known a couple people in my life that were really talented singers, extraordinarily talented. But it's the instant they got in front of other people and they were like, can you sing for us? They would just retreat into their shell. And then, they felt pressure, so they would sing, but they kind of like held back a little bit, almost like, the difference between dancing alone in your room and dancing in front of people in like a bar or in a club or something, right? Like you kind of hold it in a little bit and you reserve yourself. But to fully commit to just dancing like a freak and having a great time, or fully commit to giving your absolute best vocal performance, this is strangely difficult. And I used to think, like, I'm not sure how much of this is really tied to the people watching us, to the social environment, to the feeling of being judged. I don't know if that, how much of that hesitation has so much to do with other people as it has to do, for me anyway, and I can just speak for myself, but for me it had a lot more to do with my perception of, does it feel safe to truly be myself? And so there's two levels to this in terms of my own personal experience anyway, is that one was that I realized that when I connected with another human, when I connected with the world, I felt as though connection wasn't safe. And there's a whole history towards that, right? And there's various degrees of trauma that I'm not going to, get into, because that's my own personal boundary. But unfortunately, that's something that lots and lots and lots of people can relate to, which sucks how common that is. But this idea of closeness, of building a relationship with someone, of getting to know someone, and here once more, letting yourself be revealed. Those intimate parts of yourself that are vulnerable. And quite frankly, I don't know if there's anything more vulnerable than a performance art. Like dance like nobody's watching. You really are committing to that. And to put that out there is kind of an intimacy that happens between you and the audience. There is a connection there. And if you're somebody who maybe has an attachment injury or an insecure attachment style, there's going to be a lot of layers of personal work to go through to be, to build enough courageousness to pursue that. And I think that's true for most people. In fact, I think if you have a pulse, you probably are in a battle of learning what it means to connect with yourself and other people, which is quite frankly the same thing. I think the other side to this is kind of antithetical to what I just said, which is weird, but it does go together, is that a performance art, so even in the example of if you're dancing like nobody's watching, if you're a dancer and you're doing this, the weird thing is that your art is a reflection of you, but it is not you. Right. And this is kind of a strange thing. I'll never forget this. This is how I knew I made it. I was a stage hypnotist. I was doing stage hypnosis, and I had a show in Turtleford, Saskatchewan. Whew, that's how I knew I made it. I say that kind of jokingly, but also I want to be clear, man. Everyone I met in that town was fantastic humans. It seemed like a pretty groovy place. But yeah, I had this show, and it was for a school, and man, I got to be careful because I don't know if there's more than one school in that town. So, but that's okay. I'm sure they will give me grace. I have nothing but nice things to say about them. But yeah, they were putting on this fundraiser for a PA system, and so they wanted some entertainment, and I had a referral, and I was able to do that performance for them. And I forgot about that. I just had a really cool memory. Anyway, I'll keep going. But yeah, so I did this show, and I was pretty inexperienced at this point. I think I only had 10 shows under my belt. So was it the greatest show that I'm capable of? Definitely not. I'm still growing. That's fine. But the point is this, right? It was the best show I was capable of at the time. At the end of the performance, I'll never forget this. This kid comes up, and he asked me for my autograph, and my dad happened to be with me at that day, and you would think my dad was in the background, and he kind of sees this kid ask me for my autograph, and you would think signing an autograph in front of your parents, you'd think that would be a really cool moment, right? I gotta tell you the truth though, man. When that happened, I was I did my I think I was successful. I was, I put on a smile, and it was no different than another performance, I suppose. But inside, how I truly felt was unbelievably lonely and sad. And the reason I was lonely and sad, and it's taken a long, this is the weird thing about humans and just me in general, I think too, is there's so much of my behavior and emotional experience that I will have but not know why I've had it. Like, there's a lot of therapy and a lot of like inner work required to like understand why, I behave in certain ways. I think that's true of a lot. I think that's true of everyone, actually, but I'll only talk from my point of view. But it took a lot of reflection to realize what was happening there. And for me, what I've realized was that I had this same issue I described earlier about feeling like closeness wasn't safe, right? So at the same token, I also realized that if I was successful, if I performed so well that someone enjoyed the performance, and then they came to talk to me and connect with me, I also realized that it wasn't really a connection, because the performance was just that. It was a performance. It was a part of me, but it wasn't me. And the very thing that this person came up to me to celebrate, well, it wasn't me. And I was also in a stage in my life that didn't really feel like I really had a secure sense of an identity. I didn't really feel like I knew who I was. So I got this real tug and pull and difficult feeling of like, hey, well, when I do this performance art, I get attention and validation, and that feels really good, but it also really hurts because it's kind of like, hey, dance monkey boy, like it's not me that people are accepting and validating. So even when I do it well, it still hurts because it just feels hollow and empty, like I can never ever connect to another person. And I think, and I speculate, and again, this is a speculation, I don't know, but I think this is common for people in performance arts. That I think there's like a lot of this, nobody really prepares you for these sort of emotions and feelings, and nobody really talks about them, at least that I've encountered. I hope that's not true. And so if you are unfortunate enough, which is a weird thing to say, to be hyper successful at a young age, there isn't just a lot of people that can relate to this kind of experience. And so there isn't a lot of mentorship in that and discussion about what's happening in these spaces. And I really do believe this is why you see a lot of public figures, I'm not going to mention any names, that just go off the deep end and end up turning to drugs and alcohol and all kinds of behavior that is maladaptive. And this is not a form of judgment at all. I think this is a very rational response to a very painful stimuli. And in that sense, I feel extraordinarily grateful that nobody knew my name, that I wasn't successful for that period of my life, because I'm convinced that it would have just absolutely destroyed me. Which by the way, I don't necessarily think this experience is unique to performance arts, but I do think the volume is just dialed up really, really high in performance arts of this experience. I would imagine, I wonder if this is similar to the imposter syndrome, right? The idea that, you have, let's say you have a job as a dentist, here's an example, and because you have a medical degree, a doctorate, people talk to you and you're like, oh my gosh, you're so smart and you do so well and you have so much money and you're this and you're this and you're this. But from your perspective, you're like, I feel like the same person who knew nothing about dentistry when I started, and I acquired these skills, sure, but like, that's not me. So I don't know if those are the same thing or if they're correlated or not, but I suspect there's a relationship between these two things. And so from my point of view, the barrier to getting started in magic was this barrier, is that it just never felt right. And quite frankly, from my point of view, it never really felt right connecting with people, period. This was something that took a lot of honest reflection and looking in the mirror. And, I have to be honest, it's not just from my point of view struggling to connect with other people. I also wasn't exactly a fun person to be around. Like that was true for a period of my life. Um, and I'm not justifying that. I'm also acknowledging, though, it was a rational response to painful stimuli. That isn't a justification of behavior, but it is an important explanation for me in my journey anyway, so that I don't commit those mistakes again. Um, yeah, but this path, I think, of stepping into your own and just, I think like for me anyway, like there was so many things about myself that I never really knew, right? Like just little things, like what kind of music I liked. Like I was like, do I actually like this music, or do I listen to it because if I actually listened to music I would get like picked on for? Like, I don't know, do I actually like the Backstreet Boys? Are they a good band? Or do I just say I don't like them because other people don't like them because apparently they're not popular to like? Or I'm nothing against the Backstreet Boys. I'm just trying to give an example of, this music's associated with, let's say, not a rough and tough kind of masculine frame, so I shouldn't like that. And I was like, man, like if I didn't care about that, if I was just celebrating who I was, what would I listen to? Like, what do I actually like? And I started asking those kinds of questions. And then I started, here's the real thing, acting it out, like playing that music, enjoying it. And it's interesting because now all of a sudden you hit this strange boundary where it's like, am I now compensating by being overly performative, right? Because I'm just blasting this music in public. I'm also not being authentic. I'm basically just holding up a middle finger to the rest of the world and saying, screw you people for having these opinions of these things, and I'm different, and oh, look how special I am. And that's also not authentically me either. So it was interesting as I began this journey, I ended up like making the classic mistake of overcorrection and undercorrection, and then trying to figure out what is not only my authentic self, what is also authentic expression of that. And man, what's so weird about this is that in equal measure, it's complicated and simple. It's both. It's so simple. But where I think it gets complicated is that there is no unifying answer to this problem. Every scenario is different. And I think here's the real reason I was saying earlier how building relationships to others and to yourself is the same thing. It's this. It's that as you build a relationship with yourself and you get to step into who you really are and what you really like and what you really think about things and what you actually know and what you don't know and your level of intelligence, and hey, it's okay that there's other people smarter than you, and just because you maybe have an intellectual edge over some other people doesn't mean you're better than them. And just really stepping into this. Shit, I forgot what I was going to say. We were talking about, okay. Oh yeah. When you step into this, you begin to get to know yourself and you begin to trust yourself. Because now all of a sudden you're practicing this process of honoring not the person you want to be someday, but that idea of someday now is today. You're doing the work inside yourself now of being this person. And all of a sudden, you begin to trust yourself. And this is the real important thing, I think, is that, when you make a promise to yourself, and that's the way I organize it in my mind. I don't say, hey, I hope I'm going to get up tomorrow at 7 a.m. or I want to. It's like, no, I made a promise to myself I'm getting up at this time. And if I made a promise to Bob across the street that I'm going to make pancakes for him, I want to be the kind of person who keeps that promise. And so if I'm holding myself to that standard relating to Bob across the street to make him pancakes, it's a weird example, it just came to my head, I don't know why, then why do I feel like it's different for myself? I put it in my calendar, I'm going to work out today. That's a promise I made to myself. And then all of a sudden, when you start following through with what you say to yourself, and you build a relationship to yourself about really getting to know who you are, you get this trust. And all of a sudden, this trust now, there's like that same part of your inner self, whatever the hell that is, I don't know. That same part of you that's like, hey, I want to schedule time to work out. That part of you that's like, this is good for me. Doesn't matter if I want to do it or not, it's actually good for me. That part of you also knows the best way to express who you are. When you're in a social interaction, that's the same part of you that's like, hey, don't talk about this subject, or you should speak right now, or you shouldn't, or maybe this is a boundary you shouldn't talk about. Like, that's that exact part. And the weird thing is, as you build this relationship, you begin to trust yourself that you can listen to that voice, that you can walk away, that you can learn how to express authentically in variable conditions. And even as I'm saying this to you, I struggle with this every day. There are days I mess up. I literally messed up yesterday. Messed up, quotation marks. It's not messing up. It's growing, right? Nobody does this perfectly. You point to me a human being that is purely authentic. I mean, I don't know if such a person exists. I'm skeptical. But I think this is there's something strange about this too, is because I also think true authenticity is acknowledging how far you are from authenticity, right? Which is kind of the paradox. You know, we all want to put a good foot forward and make ourselves look good, and we all want to have status and do these things, and yeah, for sure. But those things are also not us, right? So yeah, there's a bit of a paradox in that. But I think there's something else too to discuss that is helpful in this process. Because I think as you step into this process of building a relationship with yourself, and the weirdest thing is, for me anyway, this process of getting out and doing the marketing and becoming a professional magician, that was a byproduct of this work I'm talking about here. Like, this work, all of these other things they just weren't difficult at all. They became easy in a weird way. It wasn't difficult at all because this work, this invisible work, I guess, yeah, that's kind of the difficult thing, is it is invisible, right? But yeah, it's so important. But yeah, as I was doing this invisible work, I really began to divide my experience between anxiety and excitement, and I categorize these things. And I'm not a big advocate for categorization, but I do think categories are relevant in some how do I say that? Categorization is necessary, but it's kind of an activity that I think should be done responsibly. Maybe I can speak about that, maybe more detail in a bit. But by drawing these categories of anxiety and excitement, what I did to help myself in this process is I looked at anxiety, and this is going to sound insane, especially if you're somebody who struggles with anxiety. This is going to sound insane. And I will say this too, just up front. I'm not a psychologist. Everything I'm telling you in this entire podcast is my own personal experience. And my intention is just simply to provide encouragement. So do not mistake this for medical advice, and please seek out a qualified professional, disclaimer aside. Anxiety, I believe, is an expression of delusional certainty. You know, and so I'll give you a real example of something that I was hyper anxious about. This is hilarious, but it's true. I convinced myself that it was dangerous for me to fall asleep because a serial killer was going to break into my apartment and murder me as soon as I fell asleep. And this sounds hilarious and silly and ridiculous. But in that moment, I genuinely was convinced this was real. And every time I began to close my eyes and fall asleep, I would get this jolt and wake up. And so what I did is I grabbed the chair and I barricaded under my door. And all of a sudden now I felt, and I'm a grown man having this like ridiculous, but it's true. And then just even that, right? It's the more I said it was ridiculous, the more it amplified. And it was just this spiral, right? And so it's like, how the heck, like just, it was such an, like, it's not a fun feeling. Having anxiety is just not, it's not a pleasant experience. So me saying this, like, anxiety alleviates excitement, is like, what the hell am I talking about? But it was just that. It's that the anxiety was a certainty. This is going to happen. Excitement is uncertainty. This may happen, right? The idea of something being unknown is very, very stressful, right? If I approach this person at a bar, let's say, that I'm really attracted to, if I approach this woman, she will reject me compared to she may reject me. Those are very different things. And the certainty of will reject me, my body is allowed to prepare before the event. I can get my nervous system conditioned and I can prepare myself physiologically for that rejection. Whereas if it was uncertain, my body doesn't know how to prepare for it, right? So in that strange way, I think anxiety is kind of like a self-protection mechanism where it's like protecting yourself by assuming a certain condition. The worst possible case scenario, if we prepare for the worst possible case scenario, then we're going to survive. Because, hey, if every time I begin to close my eyes to fall asleep, I'm jolted awake, if that serial killer walked in, I would be in a position to protect myself, right? So anxiety, I think, is this kind of function. The weird thing about excitement, though, is that it's not necessarily a pleasurable experience. That feeling of uncertainty, this woman, person, whatever individual you're attracted to, I'm going to approach this person and they may reject me, or they may like me, or they may, I don't know. That is a deeply uncomfortable feeling, not knowing. And it's uncomfortable because it acknowledges the complexity of the world. The world is too big for us to understand it. That's just true. And so to encounter the world and all of its complexity, it's like maybe that person is a psychopath themselves. Maybe they have a personality disorder. Maybe they're awesome. Maybe they are better than you in every possible category of your own measure. I don't know. But the weird thing, though, is that we all need heuristics to govern our lives. The world's too complicated. We need a heuristic to govern. But the heuristic is, by definition, incorrect. So here's what I mean. If I'm going to approach this woman I'm attracted to at a bar, I can have a heuristic in my head that, hey, all women are X, Y, and Z, and I can use some evolutionary psychology statistics and this macro analysis that, let's be honest, the difference between a responsible academic and a non-responsible academic is their analysis of data from the macro to the micro and understanding those relationships. And this is something that, quite frankly, I think people in the manosphere, let's say in particular, don't do too well. But anyway, so we can take a macro analysis and say this is true of all women and they're going to reject me and blah, 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 right? So I have this heuristic. That's going to affect my posture. It's going to affect my gaze. It's going to affect the tone of my voice. It's going to affect the very interaction that we have, which is going to affect the result of that interaction. It just will. Another heuristic, and this is one that I occupy, everybody wants to have a fun experience. Period and stop. Everybody wants to have a fun experience. And that may or may not be with me, but I know this human wants to have a fun experience. So I'm going to do my very best to facilitate a fun experience for both of us. And that changes my physiology. It changes my posture. It changes my gait and how I walk, the eye contact I make, the tone of my voice, the jokes that I'm making. It changes all of those things. And does this mean that having that heuristic is going to prevent being rejected? Absolutely not. Believe it or not, I get rejected all the time. Try to make a habit of it, actually, every day. It's not so bad. Still here. So the truth is, both of these heuristics are incorrect, because there's no way you can know if either of those are true. You haven't talked to this person. You have no idea. But you need to occupy one to be able to engage the world, right? And this is where anxiety and the relationship between anxiety and excitement comes in. It's like, on one hand, you need a heuristic, but on the other hand, you need to acknowledge that there's uncertainty. Very uncomfortable. It is. But the weird thing about uncertainty is that, dare I say, excitement, this feeling of uncertainty, this nervousness, this unknowing, dare I say, it actually can be kind of fun. What's weird is that you can condition yourself to enjoy the prospect of entering the unknown. Let's see what this interaction brings. I don't know. Could be fun, kind of scary. Weird. It can be exhilarating. It actually is exhilarating. If you think about excitement, what are some of the most exciting things? Going on a roller coaster, whatever it is. These are uncertain things. And you can condition yourself to enjoy those things. And in that sense, I think this idea of play, of enjoying, of having fun. When I was somebody who was really unsure of who I was, and when I was not really fulfilled in my life, I kind of forgot how to play. I forgot this feeling of joyful excitement of entering the unknown. And the weird thing is, as I built a relationship to myself, like we were discussing earlier, I also began to build this relationship of fun again. So here's a concept that I like to discuss, is hypergamy. Now, hypergamy is an evolutionary psychological concept, and it is true, and it's the idea that women are attracted or will seek out mates that are either equal or higher in a competence hierarchy. We'll just say hierarchy. They're looking for men that have more status, that men that are taller, they're looking for physiological traits for protection, and these aren't difficult concepts. You can look online, you can learn about hypergamy. It's a very well documented fact. Here's the problem, though. I think this is something that isn't discussed enough. Human beings have a capacity for morality that I am not sure other non-human animals have, right? So there's something about morality that is a human experience, or maybe a human classification is a more accurate way of saying it. And I think the reason for this is that human beings have the ability to experience an instinctual drive and not engage in it. So, for example, a dog, you can get a dog to sit and stay and put a treat down, and the dog won't access the treat until you release it with a command. In this example, the dog is delaying its instinctual impulse. But a human being can make a decision, I want to eat ice cream, and that human being can decide not to. This is how people lose weight. People can decide, I don't want to lift weights, but I'm going to, and they do it. So this agency that we have, this ability to choose, and I'm going to kind of say that because I am a philosophy student, I understand the implications of free will and determinism. I'm going to leave that in a little box. Can't talk about everything, it's too much. But this ability to experience an instinctual drive and still act is fundamentally human, right? It's like, it's no different. Like, as a red-blooded man, evolutionary kind of pump on chest, human beings are not monogamous creatures, right? It's still possible for a man who is attracted to lots of different females, who's from an evolutionary psychology perspective, looking for a birthing features unconsciously in youth and these particular things. It's possible for someone to have this wiring but remain faithful to their wife. This is not an impossible thing. Just because there's, let's say, a program doesn't mean you're doomed to follow this program. And this is exactly what I think the kind of manosphere types get wrong, is that they will lay out this argument from evolutionary psychology, which, hey, is true. Hypergamy is a fact. Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that when a woman enters a relationship, she's going to cheat on every single man because, hey, she wants the bigger, better deal him all the time. You know, do some women do that? Sure, fine. But that doesn't mean every woman does that. And it's just not honest. It's like, here's a radical idea. Women are, I don't know, people. Wow, what a radical idea. And as a human being, they can choose to be ethical. Wow, what another radical idea. But this is just a part of the conversation that never happens. And I think this is a big problem when you look at evolutionary concepts in aggregate and how they apply over large samples. That is very important data, and it's true. And I don't want to say it's not. This is the foundation of science. We need large data sets. But I also think it's important to be careful in our applications of these data points, to understand these data points, to be responsible in our application into the microanalysis. So if all of these things are true about men, if all these things are true about women, in a interaction one-on-one, this man, this woman, how do those things apply? And they do. They absolutely do. But that doesn't mean behavior is static and doomed to these proclivities, okay? And by the way, too, man, like, just because there's a normal distribution, and let's say in that normal distribution, an average impulse, we'll say, doesn't mean it's the only one as well. So you don't know when you're speaking to an individual what drive they're even, like, it's way more complicated, right? I don't want to hide behind complication and say that these are like unknowable things. I think they are, science is always growing. But I will say misapplying large data sets is a dangerous thing, I do believe. There's all kinds of justifications people can make for their behaviors, and they can use data to back up their claims, but they're not using the data responsibly. And it's very difficult to interpret data responsibly. It's very, very difficult. So we talked about a bunch of different things, but I wanted to link these together. What I can tell you as a magician is that there is a tremendous, how do you say this? There's a tremendous power we all have with our attention. And what I mean by that is that as a magician, really what you're doing is you're training yourself on how to understand people's attention. You're a student of attention. And when you begin to learn not only how malleable people's attention spans are, but how malleable your own is. Like, I am a magician, and that's not to say I know how every magic trick is done, because that's clearly not true. I get fooled all the time. But that's just the point. I get fooled all the time. Even on tricks I know how to do. Like, if I know the method behind an effect, and a magician performs that effect for me, and they're really good, they can still fool me. I still won't see a move. Maybe they'll use a technique I'm unfamiliar with. Like, I get fooled all the time. And so when you, like, for example, the subjects we're talking about with evolutionary psychology, social media, YouTube, when the algorithm is feeding you this content and your attention is fixated on it, that's a problem. Obviously, it's a problem. It's going to change it's going to change that heuristic we were talking about earlier, right? Of how you're viewing approaching people or just approaching yourself or these relationships you're building with things. And that's one of the reasons why here on YouTube I'm focusing on providing empowering content, is I want to help people's algorithms shift towards motivational content or things that are helpful or positive, or here's the real caveat, not divisive. My gosh. Because what gets people's attention more than things that are divisive, right? Conflict is an attention grabber, absolutely. And there's reason for this. If there's conflict, we want to pay attention to it to either protect ourselves for it. But the also thing too is that tribalism is part, I think, of an evolutionary strategy that we have used as human beings. Tribalism has been part of our survival for a very, 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 very long time. You know, it's like our psychology is really programmed that we only get along with people that see the world the same way we do. If you see the world the same way I do, you're a friend. If you see the world differently, enemy. This is a very, very, very big problem. And I think this ties to this idea of morality. I was saying that as a moral agent, we have the ability to choose how we engage the world independent of impulse, of, let's say, programming. So I do think it's possible to connect with people that see the world differently. I do think that's possible. And the weird thing is, when you encounter someone who sees the world differently than you, like all of a sudden now you're fascinated. I've got a million questions. And that fascination is reciprocal. You have this beautiful opportunity now where both of your fascinations are heightened, where you're both just fascinated by each other. And what a fantastic way to connect with another human. So the weird thing is, I think it's actually really easy to build a relationship with somebody who sees the world differently. But I think that's the caveat, is seeing the world differently is a different classification than somebody being wrong. And it's so easy to be like, hey, I have this opinion, you have this opinion, you're wrong, I'm right, I'm good, you're bad. Are these classifications of objective morality, of things being objectively true, objectively right, objectively wrong, do these things exist? This is maybe a conversation for a different podcast. My answer is, I don't know. I have an argument, but it's an argument, not evidence. So I have a speculation, but that is the best I can offer to that. But nonetheless, you have a multiplicity of interpretations, and really, when you boil it down, no two human beings are thinking. This idea of you think like me is wrong. That is objectively wrong. No two human beings think the same, as much as we would like to think that we do. And I guarantee you see this in married couples. There's I don't know if there's a relationship where you can have more intimacy than marriage. I don't know. Maybe there is. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments. But if you're with someone for a very, very, very long time, they're going to continually surprise you. Promise you. People are strange creatures. And as much as you may think you know how somebody thinks, I promise you, you will be proven wrong. Because it's complicated. And this isn't because this person's lying to you. It's just because most people, and I'm including myself, are mysteries to themselves. I'm learning new things about myself every single day. You think I can communicate the complexities and nuance of who I am to you? I can barely do it to myself. So I think having the awareness of our ability to choose and not react, to take a moment and realize that an emotional expression can be reflexive, but it doesn't have to be reflexive. And what I mean by that is if some event happens and it triggers an emotional response, we can have that reflexive emotional response internally and we can process it, and then we can be granted a moral decision of how to act. And if we want to put water on that emotional experience and let it grow, or if we want to put water on a different interpretation, a different schematic structure, a different emotional response, and let that grow. And all of this project of acting as a moral agent, of feeling impulses and drives and instinctual drives and choosing whether or not to indulge in them, the process of cultivating authenticity, the process of delineating a difference between anxiety and excitement, the process of realizing and separating artistic expression from identity. Now when I'm performing magic, it's not me that I'm performing. It's not a mechanism to connect with people. What it really is for me is I get an opportunity to share an experience. That's it. I'm sharing a wonderful experience with someone. And if a proxy of that is I get to have a connection, great. But a positive experience and the connection are different things for me now, right? And these things were what, in my estimation, is what makes it hard to get started, is what makes it hard to start your own business. This is the hard work of putting yourself out there, of chasing your dreams, of being the person you want to be. This is the hard work. And I think we, in our avoidance of this, I think everybody knows this, but in our avoidance of this, we tell ourselves that it's difficult to market, that I don't know the right people, I have to get the right business card, I have to have a website, all this garbage. And it's not true, man. It's not true. The real reason, I believe, and in my own experience of being vulnerable and telling you the truth about me, the real thing that was a barrier to becoming a professional magician, to being an authentic person, was just that, being an authentic person. It's strange how difficult it is to just simply be yourself. And with that said, if you're listening to this and you relate to this struggle, please be kind to yourself, be patient. This stuff takes time. I caught myself saying that I wasted 10 years of my life. And I did, right? Like I was in jobs that I just didn't really enjoy. There's nothing wrong with the jobs I was in. There was great humans there, but it just wasn't me. And I was living a deeply inauthentic life. I was wearing masks. I was a person that I wasn't for a very long time. And I didn't know how to connect with people for a very long time. It was over a decade of this. And that was really, really painful. But life doesn't have to be like that. And you're stronger than you think, and you can do this. But I think there's a trap here, and I think people get overwhelmed by complexity, and I'm including myself in that. And because of that, they overestimate the amount of work they have to do in a day compared to a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you can get 1% closer to stepping into the person that you are every day, just 1%, you're crushing. And quite frankly, I didn't even have that much progress. I was getting 0.5% closer to my authentic expression every day. And that's the only reason I'm able to make this podcast that nobody's listening to. But small steps, progress over perfection. It's okay to lay out a kind of a structure and to look at issues and be like, oh man, this stuff is like really interesting, but it's also really complex. And oh my God, how am I going to figure this stuff out? Yeah, I like that stuff too. But I also think that in of itself can be an escape. Here's a question. What is something that you can do today to be 1% closer to trusting yourself, to loving yourself, to building a relationship with who you really are? And just have faith that the more you get to know yourself, the more you're able to have a great relationship with yourself, the more that you're going to be able to have those positive, beautiful relationships with other people. And so with that said, I just want to encourage everyone listening that you can do this. Stay positive, get after it, And the weirdest thing about this kind of work is that it's easy. It's easy to love yourself because you're very lovable. But it's also hard because it's painful to realize that maybe you haven't before. So I would highly encourage you to get your butt into therapy, speak to somebody who's much more qualified than me, and keep fighting the good fight. I look forward to seeing you guys next week for the next podcast. I'm going to be uploading the video of the journey of getting booked as a professional magician, of what it was like. So I'm currently booked at 2 different venues, waiting on a third right now. Looks like I'm going to be booked at 3. I'm trying to fill up my schedule, but yeah, got money coming in as a professional magician. So you can expect to see that vlog coming up. And then we're also going to be doing the bankroll challenge now. We're turning $50 into $150,000. Good God, that's going to take a very long time playing micro stakes online. It's a poker challenge. But hey, man, we're going to be posting updates on that too. So stay tuned. Thank you for listening, and take care of yourselves.